Good morning, humanity. My name is Marla Neighbor. I am one of our communicators and connections pastor here at Humanity Church. Let me pray for our time today. Lord, thank you for what you've already done. Thank you for just the visual of a family who is committed to raising a kid up in your ways. Thank you for a world where kids have hope and where there is something to live for. God, thank you that you are our sustainer. You are here and you are ready to transform hearts and minds. So bring that home to our hearts and minds today in a real way and let us not leave the same. In Jesus' name, amen. Several years ago, I hadn't yet learned the art of delegation and empowerment. And one of our very own, some of you know her, Shara Williams. If you know her, you love her. I'm certain of it. I was sort of a one-man show when it came to our Sunday logistics. I had my hands in everything. And I loved it that way. I would have said that I wanted more help. I would have said, oh, yes, please, come help. But in reality, no. I wanted to do it all. And I remember one particular Sunday, after several people had asked to help with tearing down and putting the coffee away, I'm brushing all the grinds out of the coffee maker top. And meanwhile, I have, as usual, someone who had a need and was coming up wanting to have a decent conversation, actual eye contact, get prayer. And this woman was crying, and I was praying for her. I was cleaning out the coffee grinds, and I didn't have a hand, so I was affectionately using my elbow to touch her as I prayed for her as she cried as I was cleaning out the coffee grinds. And after the same person who had come up to me several times prior to that, Shara, and I had said, I'm good, thanks. She looked at me in the eyes, and she put her hand on my hand, and she said, Marla, let me help you. And I was like, oh, I got it. And a switch flipped in that moment. I think everyone knows, what is the first step to addiction recovery? Admit you have a problem. Now, how many of you, by show of hands, if you so choose, would say that you are recovering from a I'm good, thanks mentality? Anyone ever have that experience? Anyone have a family member or a friend who is recovering from the I'm good, thanks mentality that you are trying to help? You're like, help me help you so I can be in this with you. There's something that's haunted me in the best way for years that Nathan's grandfather told me once. Now, Nathan's grandfather and grandmother, if you don't know, Ralph and Ruth Neighbor, in certain circles, they are legends in the church world because they have created and been a part of sustaining beautiful and powerful movements of Jesus all over the world, ranging from Ukraine to Brazil to the Ivory Coast and Korea and everywhere in between. There's 10 countries I'm not even naming where they have personally supported and watched churches go from tens to hundreds to thousands to tens and tens and tens of thousands as a result of this outpouring of the Spirit of Christ through this movement. And I remember one day sitting with them and Ralph, whom I affectionately know as Popo, he told me that out of all the places that he's been, that he has yet to see the kind of movement he's seen in all these other countries happen in quite the same way in the U.S. And the natural question, why? Why is that? And he said, it's because we are addicted to independence and that there is a desire to do it on our own in a way that doesn't keep you dependent on others or utterly and desperately dependent on God. Now, the definition of independence means free from outside control and not being dependent on another. So In Isaiah chapter 40, which we're going to spend just a few moments on, the Israelites were years and years into a really difficult, ongoing circumstances, okay? These guys are no stranger to suffering, and they're burnt out. They had gone yet again from this posture of being hand in hand with God, not knowing maybe what's coming down the road, but being able to see one step in front of them at a time, trusting God, being faithful to listen and follow his ways, to a posture of heart that says, I know best, and I know more than God does. That's where they're at in this passage. And they're complaining, and this is their complaint. Their complaint is that because things do not look or feel the way that I think they should, that God must surely have lost track of us. God must surely not care about us. Can anyone relate to a moment in your life where you feel like, man, why does God have everyone else's back but mine? Or where is he? Why didn't he show up? Where's he been? My job, my kids, my family doesn't look like what it should look like. My finances, my circumstances, my health doesn't look like what I think it should look like. God must not care. So I need to take things into my own hands. So here's Isaiah's response to that, starting in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 28. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. There's our animal reference. They will run and not grow weary, and they will walk and not be faint. Now, how many of us today carry even if it's a subtle weariness in our bodies, because just this last week alone, we encountered issues, we encountered setbacks, we encountered hopes that didn't come to fruition the way they thought they were, and we maybe a little, if any at all, acknowledge our desire and desperation for God's help in the process. And just take a little self-accounting. How many times this week did I say, whew, Lord, I need you. I need your help. Step one, admit that you have an independence problem. Just acknowledging it from the beginning and, okay, I'm good, thanks, kind of problem. And I'm not secure enough in my identity to ask for help kind of problem. And if I'm honest, I don't want anyone to control me, or I don't want to be dependent on anyone, let alone fully dependent on God kind of problem. It's a thing. Because to not be in control feels like being out of control, right? Wrong. Because you only feel out of control when you don't trust the person that you're relying on. When you are sharing a load with someone that you trust, isn't it the best? I mean, it's the best. Like your work multiplies. It feels like you're not alone in it. It feels like you've had your strength renewed. Like someone has your back. Like someone actually cares. And, with the Sunday thing, the logistics and coffee and all of that, it took some prying out of my hands. But once I made that conscious choice to actually say, you know what? I need help. I can tell you that that was one of the best decisions I had made all year, because it not only allowed other people to be in community with me, to actually welcome everything that came with that, but it also freed me up to use my gifts and to use my strength and to actually get some energy back for the things that I was created for. And it was beautiful. So this conversation, it isn't about coming to God strong and him making you a little bit stronger. This is about admitting that we don't have enough strength without him. That just going to him and letting him know, Lord, I cannot do this without you. At least not to the biggest version of what I'm up to. It's not just about work or projects, but trusting God to take on our fears, our worries, our anxiety, our dread, our hopes for the future. We need you, God, for the future, for what you are creating and building in me. I've been skydiving once. My husband literally, I've never heard these words out of his mouth. He said, Marla, I forbid you to go skydiving again. I was like, who are you? I've never heard those words, but apparently I'm not allowed to go again. But I went once, thankfully, before I met Nathan. And it's the closest I've ever gotten to what I imagine it would feel to soar like an eagle and be living in the full appreciation of knowing that the God of the universe has his entire wind at my back. That is exhilarating. That is worth waking up for. That is joy-filled. Whoa, like, what in the world can my day look like when I know that I have the God of the universe at my back, who is willing to break down paths and is willing to take on the burdens that I carry, who's willing to lighten that load, who's willing to say, I go before you and I do have enough strength. And you're going to do this on my strength and not on your own, because can you imagine doing life, and maybe many of us can, without having any help at all, let alone the help of the God of the universe, who's just on the edge of a seat, ready to hand it out anytime you ask. Jesus never backed down from a promise. Jesus is the promise. He is God's word to us in human form. And if we can't trust him, if we can't trust him with his promise of hope, his promise of making the load lighter, his promise of wanting to take all of our insecurities, our fears, even our greatness and all the things that comes with that and pave a way for us, if we can't trust in that, then that's honestly a pretty soul-crushing world to be in, to know that my strength alone is what's supposed to get me through today. No, thank you. God is not, he's not too great to care for you. He is so great that he can do nothing but care for you. He is for you. And, maybe for those of us who have been following Jesus for a long time, we might feel really clear and empowered and to be able to say something ironically like, God, I do trust you. I trust you with my life. But maybe at some point along the way, your hand slipped out of his and you picked up control over some area of your life that you were never meant to shoulder, never meant to carry on your back. And that is exhausting. And even if it's a little daily thing, an addiction, an ongoing pattern, that thing where you're like, why am I here again? Why do I do this thing? That thing. God is saying, I want you to trust me, not just with your life, but with this too. What do you have your grip on? What do your fingers need to be pried off of by just saying the phrase, God, I admit I have an independence problem, and I need you. Things are not going to always look like what they should be. And, maybe like the Israelites, they trusted in God at first, and they did a pretty darn good job of it. I mean, you've got to be pretty trusting to follow a pillar of fire and a cloud of smoke and going in this one direction, eating the manna provided, and just keep heading on that direction day after day after day, year after year, as people grow old, as they die. But then it turned into a decade, and then another decade. And then they got weary of trusting this God that they decided no longer had their best at heart. And then for those of you who don't yet personally know Jesus, maybe you've been in and out of the church scene, or you've kind of been around this conversation, but you've never had a moment where you have fully trusted God with your whole life. Maybe you've trusted him with all but that one junk room closet. You know what I'm talking about? Everyone's got it. Everyone's got that closet where you cram everything in, you shut the door and hope nobody ever opens it, lock that baby. Maybe you've trusted him with part, but today is the day where he's asking you to trust him with the whole deal. This is a moment for you to step fully into that exhilarating, soaring, freeing kind of life today. So here's what we're going to do. This is how we roll at Humanity sometimes, for those who are new to this. We're going to have a question that's up here on this screen. And we're going to give you a few minutes just to look at the person next to you, maybe 2 or 3 of you, turn to someone. If you're alone, have someone join in with you, or just tap the shoulder of the person next to you and say, hey, let's talk. And so here's a question we're going to put on the board for you to consider. What is one area, just one, where you are working out of your own strength? What are you willing to do today, says today, as an act of trusting God for his strength in that area instead? So one area where you're working out of your own strength, and what are you willing to do today as an act of trusting God for his strength in that area instead? So we're going to bring up the lights. You guys can turn to one another. We'll have a few minutes on the clock, and then Nathan will come back up with a new topic.
All right, go ahead and bring your conversations to a close and come back together. If you're online, you can wrap up your chats on there, and we're going to jump into our next animal today. So I was in Atlanta last weekend, which is why I wasn't here to launch our series together. And I was coaching with some clients out in Atlanta, and there was a woman that I was working with, and we were talking about her decision-making processes, the way she makes decisions, how she makes decisions, what informs her. And we were talking about some decisions that she was making that she would define as foolish, some decisions that she would define as less than whole, less than healthy for her. And she kept saying, well, you know, it's just the devil. It's just the devil causing me to make these decisions. And I asked the question of, could it possibly not be the devil? Could it just be you making funny decisions? And that was an absolute no. No, there's no possible way that that this could be me making these decisions. This has to be the devil that is informing me of these decisions. And I just succumb to him in those moments. It's so interesting because people of faith oftentimes give the devil a lot of credit for what is actually just their foolishness. That we oftentimes blame all kinds of things on this enemy, that we are actually the ones just making decisions. And we would rather be not responsible for our decisions than actually step into a space where, no, I actually make all kinds of screwy decisions in my life for all kinds of reasons. But when we find ourselves there, when we find ourselves making decisions that are less than whole, that are less than healthy, that move us into a space of destruction rather than wholeness, what it does is it reminds us that we humans are actually animals too. That there's an aspect of us that live inside the animal kingdom, and so we are connected in some way to this. That the fact of the matter is that all animals' behavior is driven primarily by two motivators. One of those is, how do I avoid pain? How do I get away from things that are painful? And so animals are driven by, how do I remove myself from painful situations? How do I avoid painful situations? I mean, at some level, it's like, hey, if I put my hand in this trap, it's gonna get hurt. On another level, if a tiger is running after me, I need to run away because that's gonna be very painful if they catch me. And so that's one motivator of behavior for animals. The other motivator of behavior for animals is whatever is pleasurable, whatever brings me pleasure, just keep doing that. In fact, keep doing more of that. And so what motivates all animals, including human beings, is how do I avoid pain and how do I enhance pleasure? How do I get out of painful situations and how do I get myself into spaces where I can enhance pleasure that's coming at me? And we as human beings, we do this all the time. Now, this is helpful for survival. When we need to remove ourselves from a painful situation or a potential threat, it's helpful. When we need to get into a situation that's going to cause us to move forward, that's helpful. But it's less helpful when we're attempting to thrive in life. It's helpful to keep us alive. It's less helpful for us to move our lives forward. See, because here's the thing. Sometimes the pain and the struggle is actually helpful in guiding us towards knowing what is whole in life. It's helpful when you touch a hot stove to know, oh, that's painful. Now I have wisdom, so I know what's there. Or going to the gym every day can be a painful experience, and yet it helps us get stronger as we move forward. On the flip side, not all pleasure is actually helpful for us. Have you found that to be true? That eating massive amounts of donuts every day, or stepping into comfortable conversations, or avoiding difficult conversations and conflict is not always the thing that's going to move us forward in life. And so when we find ourselves there, we call it foolishness. And one thing that separates us from all other creatures on the planet, that actually elevates us out of just being an animal into a spiritual being, is our ability in any given moment to choose. See, all other animals don't have a choice. They're like, it's painful, I'm not doing it. If it brings me pleasure, I'm gonna do more of it. We as human beings, one of the things that elevates us above all other animals is that we actually have the ability to choose. Will I go with my animal instincts to just survive, or will I step into a space of my God-given nature, to a space that will allow me to thrive wherever I am? Proverbs 17:12 gives us this image, and it says this: better to meet a bear robbed of her cubs than be a fool bent on folly. I love this metaphor of bears. There's a reason why mama bear has become a metaphor for certain mom behaviors in life. Because when we talked about mama bear, we're not talking about sweet, nurturing, caring. We're not talking about like the Winnie the Poohs of life when we say, oh, they're being a mama bear right now. When we talk about mama bear, we'll talk about like strong-willed, will fight to the death for their kids in those situations. How many of you are a mama bear in the room? How many of you have a mama bear or know a mama bear somewhere? Yeah, absolutely. I have watched Marla at times when our kids are about to be in danger, or they're doing something screwy, or someone's about to do something screwy to our kids, the mama bear comes out in her. And because a mama bear will fight to the death to protect her cubs. She will maul you with her teeth and her claws and her muscles. You generally do not survive a mama bear attack. And what the scripture is saying here, what Solomon, the wisdom that Solomon is attempting to give us, is he says, you are actually better off being mauled by a mama bear. You are better off being attacked by a bear who is attempting to defend their cubs than living a life of foolishness, than living a life where you pursue foolishness and you are void of wisdom and are unable to judge with clear common sense. So what he's saying is, if you did have to choose, would you rather live a foolish life or be decimated by a bear? Choose the bear. Because what's coming over here is going to be way more painful. It's actually going to be way more destructive. It's going to destroy your life in a way that is way worse than would you just be mauled by a bear over here. If you had to choose being decimated by a bear every single time. See, here's the problem. I have counseled and coached and worked with so many people who, in the middle of making foolish decisions, cannot see that they are making foolish decisions. Let's just make this more personal. There are times in my life where I have been making foolish decisions, and in the middle of making those foolish decisions, they did not seem foolish. When do those foolish decisions become foolish? Later on. After, when the consequences are now coming my way, when the results of those decisions are now stepping into me. See, here's the thing. I have never actually met someone that in the middle of making a decision, they say, this is a horrible decision. No one ever makes a decision saying, this is gonna ruin my life, this is gonna screw everything up, this is going to bring destruction on me and my family, this is gonna bring me to financial ruin, this is gonna bring me to emotional ruin, this is gonna bring me to spiritual ruin, my body is gonna fall apart. No one ever says that, but it is the pursuit of pleasure or the avoidance of pain that blinds us to the future that is coming in the midst of our foolish decisions. And we find ourselves saying, well, if it feels good, it must be good and it must be from God. Or if it is not painful, if it's going to remove the pain from my life, then it must be good and it must be from God. So here's the rub, is that we have this animal nature that is bent on pursuing pleasure and removing pain for our life. And then we have this wisdom from God that calls us into this higher elevated space. And we cannot actually see the place when we are making foolish decisions, that we are blind to them, that because we are always making the best decision that we see possible, we can't actually see when we're making foolish decisions. Look, how many of you can look back on foolish decisions in your life, and when you look back, you're like, in the moment, it seemed like the best decision available to me. It seemed like that was a great decision. It seemed like a great decision to date that person. It seemed like a great decision to eat all that junk. It seemed like a great decision to be right and argue with my spouse over and over and over again. It seemed like a good decision to be really bearing down on my children about what they should or shouldn't do. It seemed like a good decision to say that thing to the boss or send that email or write that text or whatever it may be. And then afterwards we go, oh, that was actually a really foolish decision that I could not see in the moment. Every fool I've ever met did not actually know that they were a fool. And every time I've been a fool in the middle of it, I was blissfully unaware that I was living out a foolish life. And this is why hindsight is always 20/20. It's only after we've made the decision and are mauled by the consequences that we realize it was a horrible decision. And how many of you have found yourself sitting in your consequences thinking, yeah, it would be a lot easier to be mauled by a bear than go through these consequences that I'm in right now. And this is what Solomon tells us in this passage about bears. So how do we realize that we are a fool bent on folly? If life hits harder than a mama bear's mauling, how do we actually recognize when we're living as fools, when so many times we're actually blind to it? I think the first thing is to recognize that inside of all of us, there's this animalistic nature that is bent on pursuing pleasure and getting out of anything that's painful or difficult. When we can recognize that and not be like backing off from that, we can then take the first step in doing something about it. When we recognize this, we actually have the power to transform or change in the middle of it. It doesn't mean that we obsess about it. So we don't become masochistic and say, anything that's painful, I'm just gonna go do it, or anything that's pleasurable, I'm gonna avoid at all costs. That's not what I'm saying here, but when we're aware of it, we can actually transform it. We can ask ourselves the question, am I making this decision because it's simply gonna bring me pleasure? Or am I making this decision because it's easy and it's gonna remove some pain? Or am I making this decision because it's actually gonna open up doors for me to step into the most elevated life possible for me and the people that I love around me? But recognizing that we are thrown towards this animalistic nature of making decisions will be the first step in recognizing when we are. And the second thing that I would say would help us in recognizing when we are actually becoming a fool bent on folly is that if I am not committed to just being an animal, I actually must have wisdom from someone else other than me. And I'm going to suggest this morning that the highest level of wisdom that we have available to us is actually found in the scriptures. That this is why engaging the scriptures is so critical, because if my decisions are often made on what's going to bring me pleasure and what's going to avoid pain, then I know that that's not going to be sufficient. So I have to have an outside source of wisdom, and the scriptures become that for us. Now, for many of us, we look at the scriptures like a giant list of do's and don'ts. And like a killjoy, right? Don't do all these things, do all these things, and you'll be okay. But what if the scriptures were just letting us know, hey, here's how you can step into an elevated life that moves you out from just your animalistic nature into this elevated level of humanity so that you can actually see the difference and the correlation between cause and effect. See, wisdom actually gives us that. It connects the dots between if I do this, this is happening. If I don't do this, this won't happen. And the scriptures give us wisdom so that we don't actually have to go through life as a fool. And so I become aware of the consequences of my actions before I even make them. I know that if I step into this decision, this is the outcome. And if I'm willing to restrain myself from this decision, this is the outcome over here. I talk to people all the time when they find themselves in the middle of messy consequences from foolish decisions that they made over here. And now here they are in the future, present, with all of their consequences around them. And I can't tell you how many times I hear this phrase, I don't know how I got here. They'll look at their debt and they'll go, I don't know how I got here. They'll look at their marriage falling apart and go, I don't know how I got here. They'll look at their career not working and say, I don't know how I got here. They'll look at all of their life falling apart around them and say, I don't know how I got here. See, what that lets me know when someone's in a I don't know how I got here space, it just lets me know, oh, you're actually disconnected from wisdom. You actually can't see that these decisions led to this outcome, that making these choices moved you towards this path, or being unwilling to make these choices moved you towards here. At some level, you were engaging pleasure or avoiding pain, rather than stepping into the wisdom that God has called you to. See, God will never actually call you to something that is outside of his wisdom. He will never actually call you to something. He will never call you to a lesser life. I can't tell you how many times people have made decisions that I've watched them make, and they say, well, this has to be God because it feels good, or this has to be God because it's going to create peace, which is actually just avoiding conflict in my life. And God will never actually call you into a decision that conflicts with the words that he has given us. See, if we're going to release this animalistic mind of what brings me pleasure and avoids pain, what we actually get to take on is the mind of Christ and all the wisdom that he has for us. Now, here's the thing that I know about that is there are times where it will call us into pain and suffering. There are also times where it will call us to avoid momentary pleasure for long-term goals and long-term benefits. That God's actually interested in playing the long game with you, not just the short, momentary blips of pleasure and avoiding pain. See, when my animal, my foolish, my folly instincts want to take over, I can actually default to what does the scriptures call me into? What is the wisdom that he has given me to step into a life of wholeness? And finally, I think the other thing, other than recognizing that I'm thrown towards this way of decision-making, this animalistic way of looking at the world, and also recognizing that God has given me wisdom through the scriptures, is that getting feedback from people that you trust, to be 100% honest with you, will actually be very, very supportive in this process. Because here's the thing, how many of you recognize that you cannot see yourself accurately? Have you noticed that? You know what's so fascinating is that I've actually never seen this part of my face. You've actually never seen this part of your face. But you know what you look like because you look in a mirror every single day and you get a reflection back. See, when people are with us in our lives and they're willing to be honest with us and we're willing to receive and solicit their honesty about what's going on for us in our decision making and how we're living, it actually allows ourselves to see what's going on over here more accurately. Others can actually see what's going on way more clear than I can. How many of you have had people in your life and you're watching them make screwy decisions and in your head you're thinking, how could they not see that? How can they not see that that decision is actually going to lead to this outcome? And what we often do is remain silent with it because we don't want to get messy or we don't want to step in or we don't want to connect or whatever it may be. We don't want to be uncomfortable ourselves in the middle of this. But getting feedback from trusted community that you know will be honest with you is actually critical in knowing, am I living a life of folly or am I living a life of wisdom? The scriptures say that we see through a mirror dimly. Like I just get a small distorted view of myself. But the wisdom of many actually allows me to see clearly what's going on around me. I am so grateful for people in my life who have spoken up when I am about to make a dumb decision. Or when I'm about to make a stupid choice in my life, and they have had the courage and the love for me to say, hey, Nathan, that's a stupid decision that you're about to make. You are about to make a very, very foolish choice right now, and it's gonna lead to this future. And I am so grateful for the men and women in my life who love me enough to say that. And I'm grateful for the people in my life that when I go to them and say, hey, tell me about this decision. What can you see? What's going on? It's so beautiful in that. Here's the thing. If everyone in your life agrees with your decisions, you should be very nervous. If you haven't had someone in your life say, hey, have you thought about that decision? Or have you thought about that lifestyle? Or have you thought about making those choices the way that you're making them? It might be time to be a little nervous about whether or not we have actual clarity around what's going on in my life. See, I get nervous when everyone else around me, including my wife or my friends, are like, yeah, everything's perfect. Like, there has to be something, right? Now, that's different from like going in saying, I'm looking for what's not working. That's different from saying, hey, I want to know. This is where David in the scripture says, Lord, search me and know me. If there's any way that's disconnected from you, I would want to know. And so recognizing, one, I don't have a clear picture of myself, and so I actually need people to speak into those areas to tell me, hey, here's where you're going wonky. Here's where you're making some screwy decisions. Here's where you're actually becoming a fool bent on folly. See, what I love about this is that you are not called to be perfect. I know that that's a tendency when we hear this, like I just need to live a perfect life or else I'm going to be mauled by a bear, right? But all you have to do in this is be willing to be aware that, hey, I am bent towards making decisions that are based on what brings me the most pleasure or what avoids pain, and I recognize that that is a natural bent towards me. And then saying, I'm willing to follow the wisdom that is set before me in the scriptures, and I'm willing to have other people speak into my life to let me know where they see I am becoming a fool bent on folly in this. And if you're unwilling to do that, the end result will be worse than being mauled by a mama bear who has lost her cubs. That the consequences that come from living a life committed to foolish thinking and foolish ways and foolish decisions is worse than any destruction a bear could ever bring on you. And so here's what I'd like for you to do in your groups of 2 or 3. I'd like for you to just answer this question. Where is an area in your life that you have a suspicion that you are a fool bent on folly? All right. Now, I know this is weird. This may be very personal, so feel free to keep it light. But I want you to think, hey, here's an area where I think I keep making weird decisions. It could be in your finances. It could be with your health. It could be in relationships. You decide how deep you want to go with that question. But in other words, here's an area where I would love like a tune-up, a wisdom tune-up, or some feedback in my life where I could say, oh, got it. I'm clear that this is not working, or I need some support in this area. And then, what is one thing you can do this week to have something new happen? Maybe it's I'm gonna start engaging the scriptures on this area, or maybe it's I'm gonna get some support from a friend who would be willing to give me feedback, all right? So find someone else, have that conversation, and then we'll wrap up our gathering together.